Hello, and welcome to this episode of The Age of AI, our series exploring the rapid evolution of the AI landscape, exploring what's now, what's next, and how that impacts the world of business, the workplace, individuals, and the world. I'm your host, Shelly Kramer, Principal Analyst at Kramer&Co. And today's conversation will be part one of a two-part series that we're going to center on the topic of the democratization of AI. We're all talking about it, that democratization thing. But today we're going to explore what's really happening in the market, who's getting it right, and where there are gaps, and actually what you can do about those gaps. My guest today is KJ Kusch, who's the Global Field CTO of WalkMe. Welcome, KJ. I'm so glad to have you.
Thanks, Shelly. It's always good to talk to you.
One of the things that I like to do when I start these episodes is I like to ask my guests to just kind of tell a little bit about their kind of career journey, career backstory. I know you've done some amazing things over the last couple of decades, so share that with us, will you?
Oh, yeah, sure. So I think what's been very exciting for me is the ability to cross multiple industries. So while I'm currently at WalkMe, I formerly worked at ServiceNow.
Right.
What really helped me in managing those enterprise type platform companies is I also came from banking. A lot of people don't know that. I spent quite a bit of time at General Motors, that was across 153 plants and plant manufacturing. Spent some time at energy and utilities and as well as healthcare. So what a lot of people don't know about me is I spent some time in the military and did nursing in my former life. But to be honest, the best job I probably ever had was in college, and that was a lifeguard.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I have twin daughters. We were just talking about that before we started recording, who spent many years lifeguarding. Swimming is their thing, and that's an easy way to make money, right?
That's
You
right.
know, I have to interject here, KJ, and for our audience, that when I first met KJ, I was in New York City a couple of years ago at a WalkMe Investor Day event for analysts. And, of course, the usual parade of company executives talking about, game plan and successes and yada, yada. And there was a part in the day where KJ, I think that you did a little bit of a presentation, and I believe I kind of remember that maybe you were talking either with a customer or two or about a customer or two. And I remember sitting there in the audience, truly being just gobsmacked by your intelligence and by your career experiences, and most of all by your passion in serving customers, because I
Mm.
share that passion. And so, really that was the beginning of my girl crush on KJ Kusch. And I have since stalked her relentlessly, and I've been successful enough that I managed to get her on this program. So there you go.
Actually, it's so nice to hear. It is. And it's been fun. It's been fun interacting.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I would also like for you to do is tell us a little bit. I've been involved with and covering WalkMe since the company was a startup, when nobody had heard the words digital adoption or digital adoption platforms, and had no idea what that was and why that would be beneficial. So and of course, WalkMe has evolved significantly since then. So I'd love it if you just kind of share a little bit with our audience before we dive in what WalkMe does.
Yeah, sure. So WalkMe is a digital adoption platform, which literally means we are a pane of glass that sits on top of any application, right? We typically sit on top of web applications, but what we really do is transform that user experience. So the way people transform that could be in training. So let me show you and guide you along a workflow, right? Or a process when you roll out a new application. For other people, they use it to drive compliance. Like, I need you to do these 10 steps in a particular order, and it happens to be the underlying application doesn't do it. So we're really about transforming that whole user experience and getting people to truly adopt that technology they invested in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that, the way that I've always explained it is that, most organizations have such a complex tech stack. And when you've invested sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars in these technology solutions, maybe they're not integrated, maybe they're siloed, maybe they're challenging to use. And, we've all had an experience where you've tried to use something and then you just bail because
Yeah.
it's too much and it's too frustrating. And so that's what WalkMe is designed to do. In at least how I've explained it is, or in the past, is kind of watch over a user while they're working, and to be able to identify where someone is getting hung up. And when you can see that 30% of our current user base is only making it to step 3,
Yeah.
you've got a problem, and so you can fix that problem. And of course, having technology solutions in your tech stack that people aren't using isn't really a good thing for the company. So this is really a way of watching and measuring and helping spur adoption.
Well, and I think you and I have talked about this before, right? Adoption isn't really just an application issue. I mean, the
Right,
way people really work is across applications. And
right,
when I work with my customers globally, the one thing they'll all tell you is I have a hybrid environment. It is, I am not 100% of any one particular vendor, which
right,
means I need that user experience layer that can go from one application to another, from one vendor application to a different vendor application.
right,
And that's what WalkMe does. And I don't think a lot of people realize that, you talk about dropping off at step 3. Well, what if 2 steps are in one application like HR, and then I got to go to my ticketing system, and then I got to go to facilities?
yeah,
Well, if the 10 steps cross 5 applications, we're going to take that user on that journey. We're going to
yeah,
help them navigate that crazy hybrid eco stack that they have.
right. Well, and that's honestly why I've always been such a fan of WalkMe, because I think that, and I know I've told you this before, I view it as, I view the platform as literally, a little assistant sitting invisibly on my shoulder, watching what I'm doing and making that more seamless, more efficient, less frustrating, and making me more productive. So I'm a
Yeah.
fan. So, KJ, I know that your official title is Global Field CTO at WalkMe, and that's really a very multifaceted role, and I very much understand why you love it. But for our audience, would you share a little bit about how you work with clients on their digital transformation initiatives and some of the other work that you do for and with them?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So, for customers, I think what's really interesting is you have to look at their world and their transformation as a funnel. That's how my department does it. And so the very first thing we do is like to align on what their digital transformation is, what their strategy is, right? And that could be for a project, for a department across the enterprise. And what we talk about is what is that user experience? What part of change management am I focused on, and how can WalkMe help? And I'll just say that's at that big end of the funnel.
Yeah,
The next thing that my department does is focus on the value, because even if you can do something, doesn't mean the value's there to do it, right? The cost of investment, the amount of resources, the SMEs. So we take
right,
that funnel down just a little, and we have value consultants on the team who also work with customers on their transformation, not just on the business case to actually like decide to do the work, but the value realization, right? The stories. What is the business story, not just transactions in the platform, and how do we work together? And so we do that after, right, we've gone live and implemented. But I
right,
think the other part that's really key is in order to truly go from some concept of digital transformation, right, application wise across a department, to what really makes it stick, or how we really start talking together, is at that use case level. And so I also own a development team that builds out the use cases. So we've said, here's your strategy, here's the value. Now, what are the most common use cases? And so I own a team who already pre-builds content on our most common applications, right, across the most common workflows, common tasks.
right,
We do it kind of, what does an application look like out of the box? And we build that content as well. And so now we go from strategy to value to it's technically possible. And so
right,
when we're working with our customers, we give them that full sweep. So think about that. That's that conversation from top down and bottom up. So that's what my team does with customers, and And it's really exciting to help them weave throughout the organization those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that we are going to talk today about AI democratization. And as I mentioned earlier, I feel like we've been collectively beating the drum about democratization and how important it is for a number of years, even back, when you not that long ago, when you think about RPA and, when, the newest, latest, greatest thing was these low code, no code applications, and anybody could be a developer, and this democratizes everything. And I'm not making fun of it. I mean, we've been talking about this for a very long time, and it is important. But in practice, again, this is the gospel that we preach. In practice, what are you seeing in the market today? Are you seeing people, organizations across the board embrace the democratization of AI? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so let me just start with leading organizations, right? When I talk about people are really seeing the value of AI, I really actually see them deploying, not just focused on deploying AI, but literally scaling it inclusively. So that means literally, and I think that's the whole purpose of today's conversation, is giving it to those frontline users, right? Not just the data scientists, and not just giving access to AI. Um, if I think about most of my customers, I think the gaps are still pretty fairly big,
Yeah,
meaning there's still AI tools are still in silos, right?
yeah,
There's not a common experience. When I think about some of the interfaces and the users who have to use them, they're still pretty complex. And I think one of the biggest gaps I see is it's all disconnected from the workflow, from the work they're doing. It is a pause, do AI, and then come back to your job. It's not
yeah,
seamless, right?
yeah,
And I think it's very interesting that we think people should pause for AI versus making AI seamless, right? Part of
yeah,
their everyday capabilities. So,
yeah,
I think some companies, right, are starting to like in the planning stages of it, right? So leading are doing it. I think some of the ones are planning on it are now starting to think about AI as its own digital transformation, right?
yeah, which is the
Meaning,
right way to think about it.
yeah, and so what I start to see now is they're building everything you need for democratization. So they're building that cross-disciplinary governance team, right?
Okay.
They're doing some piloting, but they're doing it responsibly. They're focusing on multiple role types, not just one, right? And they're not really, and I think the best way to say it, they're not stuck in the trap of the pilot trap, right? They're not piloting AI, right? They're
Yeah.
transforming their company with AI, and that's a really big difference.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that I've seen quite a bit of in the research that I've done, in the conversations that I have, is that the use of AI in we're still in nascent stages here.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about it a lot, but we're still early here. But a lot of the data shows that the heaviest users within organizations of AI applications are actually senior leaders, and sort of more at the executive level. And so in many instances, we're not seeing that trickling down across the organization, and I think that's a big misstep.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to talk with people. I think that an example is my husband works in sales. He's been with a company for 20 plus years. And is actually one of their highest performing salespeople. And I think I said it's a Fortune 100 company, so it is not a small organization. And I was working one day in iOffice from home, and he travels a lot, but he happened to be officing from home, and I was using a couple of different AI applications, and I just randomly happened to be walking through the house, and I said, are you guys using AI at all? I mean, in your work? And I'm thinking spreadsheets and forecasts and all this sort of thing. And he said, oh, I hear people talking about it, but no, I mean, as far as I know, nobody on my team is using it. And so,
Yeah.
as every husband enjoys, I said, could you take a minute and just come and watch a couple of things? And so I showed him some, applications that might be of interest in ways that I was using AI. And his mind was just absolutely blown. So when you think about it, and I mean, I know you work with customers who have sales teams who are using AI, but to your point about the siloing,
Yeah.
and thinking that only this certain user group needs to be using and experimenting with AI, I think is a misstep. And I know that you agree with that. And I will also add that I've done a video series, a series of interviews with Infosys, and they were focused in this series on enterprise AI. And what we did is we went out and talked with probably 15 of their customers across the globe
Hmm.
and people who were specifically charged with driving enterprise AI initiatives. And I will tell you that every single person that I interviewed with is saying the same thing that you and I are saying. Keeping it walled off,
Yeah.
precluding access is not the path. And people who just said, we opened the gates and we said, here are the guardrails and here's the policy. And we want, here's a sandbox environment to play in, or, we'll do training sessions and we'll do these, every Wednesday at 2:00 or whatever. But every single leader that I talked with who is having great success in their enterprise AI initiatives are making it inclusive, not exclusive.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think it's fascinating. I mean, even an article you shared about, right, one of the top retailers who completely flipped the equation and put it to the frontline workers and the customers, right?
Yeah.
Truly embracing it. It just, when I think about the executives or, when a sales rep doesn't even know that it's out there for them, I mean, it just simply goes to prove, right, that companies are democratizing the potential. They're not democratizing the outcome yet.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any thoughts on, through the work that you do, and you may or may not be able to talk about this, but, who's getting it right?
uh, so that's a good question. So I do think there are quite a few companies who have flipped that around, right? They're not really just taking AI and saying it's a rollout problem. They're saying AI is equal for all, right? They're making it usable, trusted, and supported. I see some of those great use cases. I can't say, here's what's interesting. I wouldn't say any one industry nailed it yet,
Yeah.
right? I wouldn't say any one geography nailed it. But what I will tell you is there's like this switch that happens, right? Where some company goes from piloting it to like fully embracing it. And that is really the exciting moment, is when that switch happens.
Right.
And instead of saying, okay, here's one or two use cases, and that's, typically how I start with a customer, they're like, let's get it everywhere. But then, they do it judiciously. You can't spend all the money in the world. So
Right.
you go with, here's my strategy. Here I'm trying to change the company, right? Here's
Right.
the value. Let's do it here first. But they're open to doing it anywhere, right? They're looking
Yeah.
at the full potential of outcomes. And I would say, it's more than I expected at this point in 2025.
Yeah, I think that's good to hear. Some of the conversation that we're having today around AI specifically, and anticipating and seeing the transformation that AI is driving, reminds me of the early days. I don't know, 15 years ago, when I was working with clients who were just beginning their digital transformation journeys. And social media was something they weren't using yet. They didn't have corporate blogs. I mean, the things that we take for granted today, when WalkMe does something great, they release a blog article on it, right?
Right.
Not just a press release. And they're actively participating in social media channels. But there was a day not all that long ago when that was very scary to brands. And I remember seeing how different clients and their different corporate cultures and corporate personalities, but it was not unusual back then for organizations to say, oh, that Facebook, we don't trust that, we're just going to block access. Same with Twitter, we don't trust people to do that. And so then what you had is people who were at work, sitting in their offices or in their cubicles doing their jobs and saying, I can get Facebook right here.
Yeah.
But what that did was it was such a negative sort of step on the part of leadership. I felt it was a negative step because what it says is that we inherently don't trust you.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think that the same thing applies to AI. When you keep it gated, when you keep it tightly controlled, when you don't make it something that the entire organization is welcome to learn more about and experiment with and try out, I think that I think that is equally a misstep. So I really love hearing stories of people who just realize that the quickest way forward, the quickest way to impact, and the key problems here are access, usability, and then the impact gaps in current AI deployment. And so democratizing access, making AI applications usable and seamless and productive, and then looking at where there are gaps in impact. I think that that's really the path forward.
Yeah, I just want to add to that though, because what's interesting to me is just because you give somebody access to AI doesn't mean they use it, right?
Yeah, correct.
The truth of it is there's a huge misconception that, democratization is the equivalent of access. And what
Right.
I would say is people aren't comfortable with it yet,
Yeah,
right? And so when we
absolutely.
talk about democratization and if companies truly want to go back to what we just said, how do I scale it, right? How do I really get the value out of it?
Right.
I really think it comes down to how are you going to make people feel comfortable, right?
Yeah.
Is it really a one-day training or, is it about how they really work? And,
Yeah.
everybody's so worried about risk and how do you make an employee feel like they're not creating a risk, right? How many
Yeah.
people are afraid of it? So,
Yeah.
so
Well, you know what? You can't scale what you can't see.
that's right. Yeah.
Right. And that to me is the entire value prop of WalkMe right there.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know, in a lot of AI applications, you're paying per seat, right? But if you don't know who's using it, how they're using it, how long they're using it, where they're getting hung up, where they're sailing through, how can you possibly scale AI throughout your organization?
Yeah, it just reminds me of, one of the things that we talk about is shadow AI, right?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
about, and I'll just go back a couple years when we first met, right? And in going around and meeting CIOs globally and asking them a simple question, right? Because we already had a product that went and looked for shadow AI,
Yeah.
which literally meant, right, unauthorized application.
Yeah.
But what was amazing is, how many AI tools do you think you have? And I would say a couple years ago, the answer was 4 to 5. When in truth, what we really found from running was 44.
Right.
Right? So they don't even know it's out there, right? There are nice uses. There are people who are intending to do a good job, but it's unsanctioned. I mean, it's pretty interesting how much when you put all of this into this box and say, are you really governing it? Are you really democratizing it? Um, I think everybody's well intended, but it's probably not nicely organized. It's not an
Right.
enterprise, right, priority. And so it has pockets of good and bad throughout the organization.
Yeah. Well, and part of the risk I think that's involved here when you move slowly on the AI front is that there are always going to be people within organizations who are early adopters and triers of new things and all of that sort of thing. And you have to live under a rock today to not really be hearing the, conversation everywhere about AI, right?
Right.
And so you've got people who are like, wait, I'm going to try this out. This is going to be great. And if you're dragging your heels on access, then I think you open the door to even more instances of shadow AI, because the attitude is often, well, if I can't get them to move any faster, I'm not going to wait, because this might mean I sell more than I did last quarter, right? I mean, you use
It's true. I mean, I
yeah,
think that whole so I think back 2 years till now, right? The truth of it is there's more of an urgency for AI, right?
yeah,
Um, And I think what's interesting about it is that urgency is kind of twofold, because for some people they want it fast, right? And that's the demands. But I think when you think about regulators and policy and risk and all that other stuff, that flip side of it, right? You really need to have responsibility. So to get it right, you have to do them at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Absolutely. So, KJ, when you talk to clients, which I know you spend all day, every day doing, um, what are you seeing their biggest misconceptions about
Mm.
democratizing AI might be?
So I think it's a couple of things. One is I think a lot of people look at AI as a feature, right? And not as a language. Let's just call it a language, right? And that if I just turn it on, it's just a button and I turn it on, right? Everybody will get it. And so I think, and that's one of the things I love about WalkMe, it's like, no, we don't treat like, you can't just go to somebody and say, here's a bunch of features, use it. Does that make sense? What they really want is, I don't understand how to use it. I'll just give an example. I went out to dinner last night with my girlfriends, and we have somebody who, believe it or not, probably the oldest person in the group, loves Copilot. And so we got on Copilot and we're talking and we're like making an agenda. Well, the funny part was, if you take 6 women, right, and we all happen to live in a retirement community, so we're older, and you give them Copilot and you say, I want to go on vacation, it's a split group. There are people who in the group last night who said, I loved it. It gave me this great itinerary. And
Mhm.
then there's the other people who are like, yeah, but that itinerary, do you know that restaurants were closed in that itinerary? Do you realize they're giving you a ferry schedule that isn't even true anymore? And so something as simple as going to dinner and trying to do an itinerary, it's like, wow, I didn't know I needed to get this skill to, like, say, make sure the restaurant's not closed, right?
Right.
Sure, it's still relevant. Give me reviews from 2025 or on,
Right.
right?
You have to learn to prompt.
It's a language, and what
Yeah.
I was reminded, even in my personal life last night, was it is a language. It's right,
Right.
and whether we're socially learning it or we're doing it at the office, it's something that simple, that we have to become a language, right? And
Yeah.
that counterintuitive, like asking it the right way to get the right answer,
Right.
that's what I love about WalkMe. That's what we're here to help, right?
Yeah.
And because there's so many tools out there, we're trying to do it universally. So people don't have to learn 25 languages, right? They had a hard enough time learning the application. Now to
Right.
put the AI language on top of it, we're just here to, like, make it easier.
You know, your example made me think, this is a perfect example of human nature, KJ, because in that same scenario, you used AI to build an agenda that wasn't quite perfect.
Right.
Restaurants were closed, things were outdated. And some people look at that and go, oh my gosh, AI is awful. It is
Yes.
unreliable. I am not going to use it. Nobody should use AI because it is awful.
Yeah.
Can't rely. And another person says, this is me.
Right.
I should have asked,
They
I
take
should
it so
have asked
personal.
I
Yes.
should have asked AI to do something in a different way. Let me learn from this. Again, like you said, I'm looking for a list of restaurants in Florence, Italy that have, great reviews from 2024 and 2025 or whatever. And it's like, so you think about, I need to learn the language because none of us inherently know the right language for AI. I mean, come on. How could
Right.
we just know that? But
Right.
it's a matter of trial and error, and it gets you to where you need to be. Or, oh, you know what? I used Copilot, but let me pop over and try Perplexity and see what it comes up with. Or what about Claude? And so it's just, but I come across conversations all the time with people saying, that AI is unreliable and it can't be trusted and it's just awful and we're too early stages. And I think you have the brain of person A, I have the brain of person B. And
Right.
I'm going to be more successful using it because of that mindset. So I think that was a perfect illustration of exactly that.
Well, and this goes to just, and I'm just going to make another plug for WalkMe, is segmenting those users, right? I think what's really exciting is understanding like the people who really get it right also know, right? It's not just about AI prompting for, say, a sales rep, right?
Right.
Some sales rep need more than others. Some are managers, some are the actual AE, right? Some are VPs. And so how we go about using it even differs. So we need segmented fluency around AI, not just right one size fits all. It doesn't.
Right.
So
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it would be safe to say, KJ, that there is somewhat of a sense of urgency as it relates to AI democratization. From the conversations you and your team are having with your customers, what's driving that sense of urgency?
so I was talking about that a little earlier, right? It's we can't afford to not do it because it actually is proving a lot of productivity. I mean, we just know, take any average marketing department, somebody writing and writing and writing an article many times, they can get it, right? They can get it done in minutes instead of hours or days, or you know
Right.
what I mean? And so it definitely has a lot of productivity value. And so companies want to see more and more of that. But, I still say, what about, healthcare, who has a lot of concerns around policy, right? When I think about the federal government and how strict they are, and can you really, in fact, put enough guardrails on this thing so I can roll it out to not just a few people, right, but to everyday people, everybody at the VA hospital, totally different role. Think about that,
Right.
right? Think
Yeah.
about anybody who's actually serving in the military right now in Israel, or somebody who's literally working on some private project in Australia. Like every one of those has different policies, different controls, and I think the urgency is, how do I possibly, I mean, I don't think what people can conceive is, how do I merge those? And what nobody realizes, imagine I've taken prompting, right? And I've actually turned it into a new language, and I've become your little coach. Oh, and by the way, as I need to, WalkMe can jump over, get your policy and bring it back and say, oh, and by the way, don't forget this, right?
Right. Right.
Imagine, your husband as a sales rep finds out that, he actually thinks he's doing the right thing, copying, pasting information for an account plan, only to find out he just put information into a prompt, right, that he never should have.
Right.
But because WalkMe says, policy, no, none of this kind of data, and we look for it, it says up, and it pops up a suggestion, says, I don't think you should be doing this. It doesn't, right?
Yeah.
In some cases, we can just not allow you to hit the enter, right? Healthcare, that same customer that's worried about, this urgency, it's like, wait a minute, you can help me look for specific patterns of PII data, right? And
Yeah.
mask or stop a user. Yes, that's the difference of, I can make you go fast, but I can do it safely. And that's where those two worlds start working together.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. I know that WalkMe talks a lot about embedding AI in the flow of work, and we've touched on it. I've told you before that how I think about WalkMe as literally being my sort of invisible helper, watching me work. But can you explain to our audience how this AI in the flow of work is different from just adding AI into any application?
Yeah, so I think the best word to describe it, right? The real way to talk about how it works well is when we are contextual, right?
Mhm.
To that user on that application. So, the easiest way to describe it is things like, we can provide little prompts, imagine little pop ups, little nudges that say, hey, right? I can nicely tell you, I don't think you should do this. But then I have these guardrails that say you can't do this, right? And the two examples that I just gave you, where a sales rep tries to do something and it pops up a little nudge and says, hey, I don't think you should do it. Now you do realize customers who choose that avenue, they can still go, right? I have other customers, and I'll just say a bank or healthcare, that says, if they see that sensitive data, right, in the flow of work and they're using AI, it doesn't actually, it grays out the submit button. It doesn't let you go,
Yeah.
right? So the guardrail literally says you have to fix this and then I'll let you go. Two different ways to think about really how to be seamless, right? So think about one, it happened at the moment that you're doing it. I didn't learn it in a training class and I have to remember when I'm doing it. It happened when I was doing my job, right? Two is it kept the company compliant and it kept that person productive because those few little nudges didn't mean put my pencil down, go solve a problem and come back, go look up a policy, come back, right? It's productive because I'm going to keep you going. So I think the way to think about it is, if you just add AI, and I'll think about it, to an application, it's almost like it's cosmetic. Maybe that's the right word, right?
Yeah, check the box. AI.
It's there. There's a button, right? And so I'll call that cosmetic. I don't know if it's the right word, but I'm a girl, so I'm going to use it. But if I use AI in the flow of work, now all of a sudden I'm going to use my favorite word. It's transformational, right? So instead about the button showing up and saying you could use it, right? It's the exact moment, right? You need it. And it becomes clear on, right? And it's contextual to what you need. It makes you policy aware. And in your word, it's now with built-in coaching. So I
Yeah.
think that's really what it means. So for example, I'll just, because of your husband, I'll give you an example, of a recent customer. So instead of dropping, we have a customer who instead of dropping AI into Salesforce, what WalkMe did is it guided the users when to, right, ensured the prompts didn't violate those data policies, told you that, right? But it also started automating the prompting within the workflow. So I think the interesting thing is, so if you're doing reporting and it notices you don't have your account planning, right, it makes a suggestion on when to use it in the flow of work.
Yeah.
If I'm a GSI, right, one of the things I've noticed is, I have to, when I'm sourcing out a project, right, I have to then go and check for sustainability, competitiveness, right? And those are things that AI are really good at. And what we do is we prompt it in the flow of work. And so that's really, helping people to know how to use it, when to use
Right.
it, and how to use it right.
Well, and safeguarding them along the way so that
Yeah.
one, they don't have to be nervous because I think users are inherently nervous at the early stages of using AI. So it makes them more comfortable, but also from a corporate standpoint, in terms of risk mitigation, it plays a big role there as well.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, while the democratization of AI obviously has benefits, right? The
Mm.
reality of it is there are a whole lot of people who just aren't there yet. What are your thoughts on ignoring AI democratization in favor of just saying, "Oh, we've got centralized AI governance, we're good"?
Yeah. I think it's the middle path, right? It is really truly the middle. So when I think about, centralized AI right now at the moment we are is probably still essential. And that's according to KJ, right? Nobody else says it, but I would say it's still essential.
Yeah,
Um, I think it literally needs to be balanced with that hybrid accessibility where you can grow under managed guidelines and administrative rights. So that way it doesn't become a bottleneck, because I think where people are still afraid of, did you insert your policy, did you make sure like fields are not exposed, the negative part of like brand, like who would know that Copilot, we're sitting at dinner and we're getting the wrong agenda, hey, the restaurant's closed. Well, imagine I'm a company, right? And think about the need to like fact check and not hallucinate your answers, right?
right.
And so I think that I think if you're too centralized, you're an AI gatekeeper. And I don't think any one centralized group can know everything from scheduling agendas and what a travel agent does to, what sales needs to do in others, right? So I think, I mean, great, that's strong policy on paper, but now you're going to get really low adoption rate. Like you're going to be so
Right.
risk, you're going to be good. What I really think is, I think we need to literally find a way for people. And by the way, let me add this. If you do that, you're going to get workarounds, right?
Oh,
Well, I see
absolutely.
it everywhere I've been, right? My own companies, there's always workarounds. So I think that with the right platform, right, you put in these guardrails that say, you know what? Let me help you templatize how to roll this out, which is that nice checklist that says, you know, do you want your validation to be nice? Meaning, you give them an idea, but they can keep going, or do you want them to, you cannot do it, right? And those things that people need to be reminded of. Do you want to refer to a policy? Do you want this or that? And so instead of just somebody governing it and then controlling the rollout, we create this hybrid environment where somebody sets the rules and the templates, and then the parts of the organization, so it really truly scales, can do it on their own. And a platform like WalkMe does that. And I think that middle path, which I would call kind of the hybrid, right,
Yeah,
is more important. Like,
I
the
agree.
whole workarounds is what I would call the extreme of they do it anyway. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that makes perfect sense. We are in, I think, a time when the hybrid path is the path that makes a lot of sense,
yeah.
so walk me is the middle path. I like it. KJ, my favorite part of any event, any analyst meeting, any conversation at all are real world customer use case examples. And we're going to wrap this first episode by exploring that topic. So, do you have any examples that you can share that can help illustrate how WalkMe is helping customers prevent an AI related compliance issue?
Yeah, and Shelly, I like that you're starting with like how people really start, right? Because we almost talked about, people get it right at the enterprise, right? But
Yeah,
the real way people start is to get the one use case right. And so I have to think about, so if I think about an example, like a very large D2K HR group, right? We were helping them use generative AI to review resumes. So despite the training, right, managers were still putting PII data into unsanctioned prompts. And what's interesting is they did it that way, and then they deployed WalkMe to guide users. And this was mid-task, right? So it's in the flow of work, and they were
okay,
getting those alerts, right? And it told them, hey, you're trying to copy sensitive data, right? And you're using it in an unapproved prompt format. So this was right. Catching it after the fact, all that does is create an incident. Oh, I saw the PII, and you can reverse it, right? You can
right.
react to it, but it was already a problem. So what we did is we stopped it at that moment. So it was truly compliance in the flow, not after the fact. And so within 90 days, their violations dropped by 60%. So, you know, it's very clear that
Yeah,
it's effective to stop people, right? We're still letting them do their job. We're coaching them how to use AI, but they're actually balancing out that risk. So it was truly a clear case, right, where real-time guidance outperformed the policy training alone.
right. That's awesome. I know that in a conversation that we had, maybe, I don't know, maybe a few weeks ago, you mentioned another HR specific instance that had to do with using AI to help write performance evaluations. Do you remember that?
I do, yes.
Well, I
I
think that's another one I'd love for you to share.
Yeah, and go into it detail, maybe in the future, but I think what's interesting about writing performance reviews, managers don't do it that often, right? So if you think about AI, some of it's used for our everyday work, and some of it's used to do something you only do once a year, right? And what's interesting about using AI for something like that, and this is where WalkMe truly helps, is showing, right, a manager, hey, you shouldn't use these words when you submit a person's performance review, right? The
Right,
very specific wording, right? AI is really good at sentiment, and it can say the sentiment is incorrect.
yeah,
And two ways to do it. One is, right, you can actually just have somebody copy it off, check it, right? Agents do that and bring it back
right,
in. Or you can just let somebody type nicely. And there's, right, besides agentic AI, there's what's called always on AI, in
right,
which case, think about something as simple as a red light, yellow, or a green light and a red light, in
right,
which case you write it. And if it's red, you can choose, right, to go look, and it will nicely tell you, right? I recommend some of these changes. You go in, right, in a little box and you type it. And if the light changes green, you're like, oh, I got it right. I can
I
move on,
got it right.
right? So
Yeah,
imagine that in any process where something as simple as an open comment box, right?
yeah,
I'm healthcare helping with a patient. I'm the lab scientist doing clinical trials. I'm the HR person or the HR, not the HR person, the manager doing my HR review. And that simple green light or red light
yeah.
indicates to me that my sentiment is correct, that I'm doing something correctly. It's awesome.
Yeah, I love it. And I think really the teaching moment there, what you want to make happen throughout the organization from a user standpoint is you want people to be looking for that green light. I feel like this every
Yeah,
time I upload a blog article into WordPress, and we have an application that's part of our WordPress instance that grades the SEO components of a particular article. Is your title too long? Do you have a meta? Like these little things, but you can see where you've missed the mark.
right.
And I always tell my team, like, I'm a freak, but I want to get to the green, you know?
Yeah,
And it's like a little game I play against myself because I want to be better at whatever it is I'm doing. So I love that sort of. So my point is, I think it's a teaching moment within organizations when you have this functionality to not just be satisfied if you see that red light. You want to get to the green, and I think you can sort of gamify it in that way throughout the organization that makes it a fun learning experience.
totally agree. Totally.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, KJ, as expected, this was a fascinating conversation. Yeah, I'm so appreciative of you taking time from what I know is a crazy busy schedule to join me. To our viewers and listeners, I'm your host, Shelly Kramer, and we'll be back next time with part 2 of this series exploring the democratization of AI with KJ Kusch, Global CTO, Global Field CTO for WalkMe. KJ, thanks again.
Thanks, Shelley.